Before we begin, take a slow, deep breath and let your shoulders fall softly. The world around you may have been loud today. Messages, tasks, expectations, the quiet ache of being misunderstood. But right now you don't need to carry any of that. You are safe here inside this small space of calm. This is not about judgment or blame. It is simply about learning to see clearly before life teaches the same lesson again, in a harder way. There's an old saying in philosophy that truth often whispers before it shouts. It appears in small moments first, in little inconsistencies and subtle tones. But we often overlook them because our hearts are hopeful. When a woman meets a man who seems charming, attentive and full of potential, it's natural to want to believe in the best parts of him. Hope makes us see what could be, not what is. But with time, wisdom teaches that emotional clarity is not built by hope alone. It's built by awareness. To truly understand a man, to sense his nature before he shows it fully, you must become a gentle observer of the quiet moments. A foolish man is not defined by his lack of intelligence, but by his lack of depth. His life floats on the surface of things, quick reactions, borrowed opinions, rehearsed affection. A wise woman, however, begins to notice the patterns hidden between his words. She doesn't rush to analyze, she simply observes. Watch him when life doesn't go his way. How does he handle inconvenience? A man's true nature often shows when he is denied something he wants. Some men crumble, others lash out, and a few, very few, remain kind. Does he treat the waiter with patience when the meal is late? Does he respect the boundaries of others when they quietly say no? These are not small details. They are pieces of his inner structure, glimpses into the architecture of his mind. When a man is wise, his actions carry a quiet rhythm. He doesn't need to dominate conversations or display knowledge. He doesn't need to prove that he's right every time. He listens more than he speaks, because he values understanding over performance. A foolish man, on the other hand, often hides behind noise. He interrupts, boasts, argues for the sake of victory, not truth. His confidence is not rooted in calm self-awareness, but in fragile ego. In daily life, we are surrounded by distractions that make it difficult to see people for who they are. The digital world blurs authenticity, charm becomes easy to imitate, but real awareness is not found in a text message or a carefully taken picture. It's revealed in presence. Pay attention to how a man handles silence. Does he grow restless when things grow quiet? Does he rush to fill every pause with words or jokes? A peaceful man finds comfort in quiet moments. A restless one fears them because silence reveals emptiness he's not ready to face. You'll also notice it in the way he remembers. The foolish man often listens, but he doesn't truly hear. He nods at your words, but later forgets what mattered most. It's not forgetfulness, it's emotional laziness. A wise man remembers not because he's trying to impress you, but because he values connection. He sees remembering as a form of care. The philosopher Aristotle once wrote that a person's habits define their character far more than their intentions. In love and relationships, this truth holds power. What a man repeatedly does, how he speaks, how he treats others, how he spends his time, reveals what truly governs him. A foolish man might make promises drenched in emotion, but his daily patterns betray the truth. Look not at his declarations, but at his consistency. Does he follow through when it's inconvenient? Does he take responsibility? Or does he find clever ways to escape it? There's also something subtle about humor. A foolish man often uses humor to mask his insecurities. He jokes about others, belittles softly, disguises cruelty as wit. He hides behind laughter, using it to avoid intimacy or accountability. A wise man, however, uses humor as warmth. His jokes never cut, they connect. You can feel the difference. It's the energy behind the laughter that tells you who he is. Psychologically, this difference roots in emotional regulation. The foolish man often reacts impulsively, driven by unexamined emotions. He hasn't learned to sit with discomfort, so he escapes it by projecting it onto others. He blames, mocks, avoids, or distracts. But the wise man has learned to pause. He's not ruled by his emotions. He respects them, studies them, and acts after reflection. This ability to pause before reacting is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity. In relationships, women often sense the red flags early, but emotional hope whispers louder than intuition. You may notice a flash of disrespect, a lack of empathy, or subtle control. But your heart says, maybe it's just stress. The mind creates reasons to excuse what the body already knows. Yet, every small sign matters, because consistency builds truth. The man who interrupts your words today may dismiss your feelings tomorrow. The one who jokes about your sensitivity now may weaponize it later. This is why slowing down matters. Awareness grows in stillness. When you allow yourself to observe before attaching meaning, you begin to see patterns clearly. The foolish man is always in motion, rushing toward validation, admiration, or distraction. He confuses attention for affection, control for connection. But the wise man moves differently. He's not chasing something, he's cultivating it. Even in ancient times, philosophers understood that wisdom was not about knowing more, it was about seeing deeper. Socrates often said that wisdom begins with knowing what you do not know. A wise man then carries curiosity instead of arrogance. He doesn't assume, he asks. He doesn't judge quickly, he reflects. In conversation, he allows you to exist as you are, without the need to mold or measure you. So as you navigate your own path, remember that intuition is not superstition. It is a form of subtle intelligence. It's the collection of observations your conscious mind hasn't yet assembled into words. You are capable of sensing emotional immaturity long before logic catches up. The key is to trust those first quiet impressions, instead of silencing them in the name of hope. There's a quiet power in not rushing to define people. When you simply watch, patterns reveal themselves. When you listen beyond the surface, you begin to hear the emotional tone behind the words. And in that space of quiet awareness, you can see the truth that most overlook, not because it's hidden, but because it's gentle. Truth rarely arrives with noise. It arrives in whispers. Take a moment to reflect on the people in your life. Not to judge, but to observe. Notice how they speak when they gain nothing from you. Notice how they act when you set a boundary. Notice how they make you feel when you're silent. These are the small mirrors of a person's depth. Wisdom begins there, in the calm noticing of what's real, before emotion clouds the view. Human psychology speaks most clearly in silence. Words may lie, but patterns do not. Every gesture, every tone, every pause in a conversation tells a small truth about who someone really is. When women begin to slow down and see these truths, they no longer chase the wrong people or confuse attention for affection. They start to sense the difference between emotional depth and emotional performance. The men who appear strong on the surface often crumble under the weight of emotional honesty, while the ones who seem quiet may carry the kind of steadiness that can weather any storm. A foolish man often reveals himself through his endless need for recognition. It's not always loud. Sometimes it hides in charm, in the way he subtly redirects every conversation toward himself. He thrives on being admired. His validation comes from how others see him, not how deeply he understands himself. Psychologically, this is called external referencing, when someone's sense of worth depends on outer approval rather than inner peace. This kind of man cannot stand being unseen, because his self-image depends entirely on the reflections given to him by others. When a woman meets such a man, it may feel exciting at first. He's attentive, flattering, but that intensity is not connection. It's possession disguised as affection. You'll notice how quickly he becomes defensive when challenged. A single question about his actions feels like an attack. He turns reflection into argument and responsibility into blame. The deeper reason for this is simple. A foolish man is afraid of being truly known. To be known means to face the parts of himself he has long avoided. So instead, he performs. He hides behind stories of ambition or charm, creating a version of himself that feels safer than authenticity. And for a time it works until someone, usually a woman with emotional clarity, begins to see through the act. In early relationships, this man often speaks in grand gestures. He promises forever, without understanding what forever demands. He loves quickly, because he mistakes intensity for intimacy. The wise woman learns to listen not to the sweetness of words, but to the rhythm of consistency. Does he still show kindness when the excitement fades? Does he still care when no one is watching? The foolish man's attention fades when admiration fades. He needs the spotlight of your devotion to feel alive. Once it dims, his interest dims with it. Philosophically, This connects to what the Stoics taught about control. They believed that a wise person focuses on what can be controlled, their actions, their choices, their emotions, while a foolish person is consumed by what lies outside their control, such as reputation or opinion. The foolish man is thus always restless. He seeks admiration, control, and validation from others, because he has not learned to anchor within himself. A wise man, on the other hand, is content even in silence. His calmness is not emptiness, it is self-possession. Another sign of foolishness lies in how a man handles truth. When truth appears, does he listen, or does he resist it? A man who cannot bear to be wrong will never grow. You will see it in his reactions to discomfort. He may twist your words, make you question your own feelings, or pretend that your emotions are irrational. In psychology, this is known as deflection, a defense mechanism used to protect fragile ego structures. The foolish man uses deflection because he confuses accountability with humiliation. He cannot separate the two. To him, being corrected feels like being diminished. In contrast, wise men are open to feedback because they understand that growth and humility are inseparable. They know that truth does not destroy love, it deepens it. They are willing to be uncomfortable for the sake of understanding. When a woman learns to notice this distinction, she begins to protect herself from relationships built on emotional immaturity. She stops interpreting avoidance as peace and silence as stability. The body often knows these truths long before the mind admits them. Sometimes a woman feels uneasy around a man, not because he has done something obvious, but because her subconscious has detected subtle inconsistencies, shifts in tone, tension in posture, micro-expressions of contempt or impatience. The body stores memory. It recognizes energy before logic does. When you feel a quiet sense of disconnection that you cannot explain, that is often your intuition, remembering something from the past. A pattern, a wound, a signal that this man's energy is not safe for your peace. A foolish man will often try to rush your intuition. He'll say things like, "You overthink too much," or "You're just insecure." He does this not because you are wrong, but because he senses your awareness. The moment you begin to observe instead of react, he loses control of the narrative. But you owe no one your confusion. If someone makes your peace feel unstable, that is already an answer. Sometimes foolishness also hides in subtle arrogance. He might claim to respect women, but speak poorly of his ex. He might talk about loyalty while casually flirting with others. His values exist more in words than in behavior. The philosopher Seneca once said, "What is virtue but living in agreement with your values?" The foolish man knows the words, but not the weight. His principles are seasonal, strong when they cost him nothing, absent when they demand sacrifice. Observe how he handles boredom. A wise man creates, a foolish man escapes. When life grows quiet, the foolish man runs toward distraction. Social media, attention, arguments, temporary excitement. His mind cannot sit still because stillness confronts him with emptiness. The wise man, however, finds nourishment in simplicity. He doesn't need chaos to feel alive. His energy is not scattered, it is grounded. In relationships, foolish men often confuse dominance with strength. They believe control earns respect. But true strength, in both philosophy and psychology, is the ability to remain gentle, even when you could be harsh. It's not about power over someone, it's about peace within yourself. When a man has not made peace with his own insecurities, he projects them onto others, especially the women who care for him. That's why emotionally unexamined men often drain emotionally intelligent women. They take her empathy and mistake it for endless forgiveness. It's important to understand that not every foolish man is cruel. Some are simply unaware. They have not yet learned to meet themselves honestly. But until they do, they remain unsafe for those who seek real depth. The tragedy is that many women try to heal these men, believing love can replace awareness. But love cannot teach what life has not yet broken open. To protect your peace, observe gently. Watch how he listens, how he remembers, how he treats silence, how he handles inconvenience. Every small behavior is a window into his psyche. And when you begin to see through those windows, you no longer need to wait for the storm to confirm what intuition already knew. You begin to trust the quiet language of truth, that lives beneath the surface of all human connection. There is something quietly beautiful about emotional maturity. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It moves softly, like still water, reflecting rather than reacting. When you meet a man who carries this kind of peace, you feel it before he even speaks. His presence calms rather than excites, and his silence feels safe instead of cold. This kind of man is not seeking to impress. He is seeking to understand, but to notice him, you must first unlearn the pull of emotional chaos, because often foolishness wears the mask of intensity, and wisdom appears slow, even boring, at first glance. Emotional maturity shows not in how a man loves when everything is beautiful, but in how he behaves when things become uncertain. The foolish man craves harmony as long as it costs him nothing. The mature man accepts that love includes discomfort and that care requires responsibility. He knows that every relationship passes through moments of shadow, and those moments do not scare him. Instead of withdrawing or attacking, he becomes still. He listens. He thinks before he reacts. That pause, small as it seems, is the difference between chaos and connection. A man who has not yet learned to pause will live in a constant loop of reaction. He feels something, and he must express it immediately. Anger, jealousy, pride. In psychology, this is known as emotional dysregulation. Such men confuse reaction with authenticity, believing that saying or doing whatever they feel is a sign of honesty. But honesty without awareness is just impulsiveness wearing a noble disguise. A mature man, however, understands that emotions are not orders, they are messages. He listens to them, but he doesn't obey them blindly. When you are around an emotionally mature man, you will feel a sense of steadiness. He doesn't punish you with silence. He doesn't use affection as a weapon. He is not afraid of being wrong. In conversation, he listens to understand, not to defend. He allows difference, because his identity is not threatened by it. In small ways, he creates safety. He doesn't just promise it. His voice remains calm, even when the subject is difficult. He makes space for your emotions without trying to fix them or compete with them. These are not grand gestures, but quiet demonstrations of self-awareness. The foolish man, by contrast, finds emotional stillness unbearable. He needs constant stimulation, drama, attention, or control. When things are calm, he grows restless, looking for reasons to ignite tension. He picks fights to feel alive. This pattern is not always intentional. It's rooted in a deep discomfort with vulnerability. Chaos becomes his emotional home, because peace feels unfamiliar. He mistakes intensity for passion, and conflict for connection. A woman might confuse this for chemistry, especially if she has grown accustomed to emotional highs and lows. But it's not chemistry, it's instability wrapped in excitement. To spot this difference, watch how a man handles both your vulnerability and his own. When you share something painful, does he listen with empathy or respond with irritation? Does he make space for your feelings, or does he make them about himself? A foolish man often cannot witness another's pain without turning away or minimizing it. His own emotional fragility prevents him from holding the discomfort of others. A wise man, though, can sit in silence beside your sadness without rushing to escape it. He doesn't try to control what he cannot fix. That kind of quiet patience is not weakness, it is spiritual discipline. Psychologists often describe emotional maturity as integration, the ability to hold multiple truths at once. The mature man knows he can be strong and gentle, proud and humble, confident and uncertain. The foolish man, however, splits these traits apart. He believes strength requires dominance, that being gentle means being weak. He fears contradiction because he cannot yet reconcile complexity within himself. As a result, he projects that confusion outward. When you seek emotional clarity from him, he gives defensiveness. When you ask for depth, he gives distraction. One way to notice this early is through emotional language. The wise man has words for his inner life. He can name what he feels: anger, sadness, shame, longing, because he has met those emotions before and learned to coexist with them. The foolish man avoids emotional vocabulary. He hides behind vague terms like "I'm fine" or "it's whatever." He may talk endlessly about ideas, plans, or opinions, but when it comes to feelings, he withdraws. This is not because he lacks capacity, but because feelings threaten his illusion of control. The body's memory is sharper than the mind's reasoning. When a man is emotionally grounded, Your body relaxes around him. Your nervous system recognizes safety. Conversation flows naturally. Time feels slower, and silence doesn't need to be filled. With a foolish man, however, your body remains alert, slightly tense, waiting for the next unpredictable shift. You might mistake this tension for attraction, but it's your body's instinctive awareness of danger. It senses that something within this person is unresolved, and therefore unsafe. In daily life, emotional maturity also shows through how a man manages his small frustrations. Watch how he handles everyday obstacles, the traffic jam, the slow cashier, the unexpected delay. Does he explode, curse, or blame? Or does he take a breath, accept and adapt? These moments are not trivial. They reveal how he relates to control. A wise man understands that control is an illusion, and peace comes from acceptance. The foolish man still believes that if the world doesn't move according to his will, then it's the world that is wrong. There is a kind of inner stillness that mature men carry, one that doesn't depend on perfection. They have learned that mistakes do not define them. They refine them. They are humble enough to apologize, not because they want to end the argument, but because they value harmony over pride. They can say, "I was wrong," without shrinking, and that small act creates immense trust. A foolish man avoids apology because he equates it with defeat. His ego cannot bear to be seen as imperfect, and yet imperfection is the essence of being human. The heart of wisdom lies in humility. A man who can laugh at himself, who can admit confusion, who can learn without defensiveness, he is already far from foolishness. His strength is not in how loudly he stands, but in how gently he bends. When life challenges him, he grows quieter, not colder. He becomes more introspective. He looks inward for understanding instead of outward for blame. This internal grounding makes him a safe space, not a storm. For women seeking emotional stability, the path begins with self-awareness. You must first recognize what peace feels like within you, so you can recognize it in another. The more you understand your own emotions, the less likely you are to be seduced by emotional chaos. You begin to sense the difference between passion that nourishes and passion that burns. You no longer crave drama disguised as depth. Instead, you crave steadiness, truth, and reciprocity. Philosophy teaches that wisdom is not the absence of emotion, but mastery over its waves. A wise man feels deeply, but moves slowly. He speaks after reflection. He doesn't confuse silence with suppression. He uses it as space to think. When you find this energy in a person, you feel it as peace. It's not thrilling, but it's enduring. And that endurance, the ability to stay kind through imperfection, to stay grounded through confusion, is the quiet beauty that separates a wise man than a foolish one. To recognize foolishness before it consumes your peace is not an act of cynicism. It is an act of preservation. Philosophy has always taught that wisdom is not about predicting the future, but about seeing clearly in the present. When a woman learns to see clearly, she stops mistaking chaos for love. She no longer feels guilty for choosing calm. She realizes that walking away is not rejection. It is redirection toward peace. The goal is not to become guarded, but grounded, to live with an open heart that also knows how to protect itself. The ancient philosophers often spoke of discernment as the highest form of love. It means seeing reality without bitterness. It means understanding that not every person who enters your life is meant to stay, and not every connection that begins with passion is meant to end with peace. Discernment requires silence, the ability to sit with your own loneliness without rushing to fill it with someone else's presence. Many women confuse connection with relief, thinking that someone's attention will soothe the ache of emptiness. But that emptiness is not loneliness. It's space. Space where wisdom grows if you let it. When you learn to observe people without rushing to define them, you begin to see the patterns of character unfold naturally. A foolish man reveals himself in the small, ordinary moments. How he speaks about others when they're not around. How he handles gratitude. How he behaves when he is not the center of attention. You notice whether he shows up when things are inconvenient, whether his kindness is consistent or conditional. These small details are the threads that form the fabric of trust. They tell you whether someone's heart is built for depth or only for display. There's a quiet art in not trying to fix anyone, A wise woman doesn't invest her peace into someone else's potential. She understands that a man's growth must come from his own decision, not her devotion. She can offer understanding, but not rescue. She can offer compassion, but not at the cost of self-respect. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote that each person's life is colored by the thoughts they choose. And if a man continues to choose foolishness, pride, denial, arrogance, then no amount of love can change the palette of his character until he wants to change it himself. Learning to choose peace means returning to yourself. It means noticing where you abandon your intuition for the sake of attachment. It means understanding that love built on fear is not love, it's dependency. A foolish man often thrives in the space between your hope and your hesitation. He senses your kindness and uses it as permission to avoid accountability. But your intuition already knows when something isn't right. You feel it in your body long before your mind creates reasons to stay. Philosophy calls this the quiet intelligence of the soul, the ability to know truth through feeling. In ancient Greece, women observed human nature differently from men. While men debated logic in open squares, women learned through silence, through watching, through emotional intuition. They saw how pride changed men, how power shifted their tone, how love revealed or corrupted them. And through generations, this observation became wisdom, the kind that doesn't need words to recognize truth. The man who cannot be gentle with himself will never be gentle with you. He may promise peace, but his actions will always betray the unrest he carries inside. When you begin to live from peace, your standards shift quietly. You stop craving intensity and start valuing ease. You stop chasing attention and start noticing energy. You realize that being understood is rarer than being admired. The men who once seemed exciting begin to feel exhausting, and those who move slowly, who listen deeply, who take responsibility for their words, they start to feel like home. You no longer confuse boredom with safety. You recognize that stillness is a sign of emotional maturity. Philosophy teaches that the wise live according to nature, which means they do not resist what is true. A foolish man resists reality. He tries to bend it to his ego. He argues with facts, denies feelings, and blames the world for his missteps. A wise man accepts the truth as it is, even when it hurts. He learns from it instead of hiding from it, and that acceptance makes him reliable, not perfect, but present. In a world full of people addicted to distraction, presence itself becomes a form of devotion. Emotional safety is not created by romance. It's created by consistency. A man who is emotionally safe does not promise never to make you cry. He promises never to make you doubt your worth. He doesn't compete with you. He collaborates with you. His love doesn't shrink your world. It expands it. You will notice it in the quietest gestures. The way he listens to understand, not just to reply. The way he takes responsibility without resentment. The way he speaks gently, even in disagreement. These things cannot be performed for long. They are habits born from inner peace. There is also wisdom in recognizing your own role in patterns. The more you study yourself, the more clearly you see others. When you heal the parts of you that crave validation, the men who exploit validation lose power. When you learn to sit in silence without needing to be chosen, the ones who seek to manipulate your loneliness fade away. You start attracting emotional balance because you've built it within. The philosopher Lao Tzu said that mastery begins with self. When you understand your own nature, no one can deceive you for long. A life rooted in awareness becomes peaceful, not because it is free from pain, but because it no longer repeats pain unconsciously. You begin to see lessons where you once saw loss. You begin to find clarity where there used to be confusion. You learn that walking away from foolishness is not arrogance. It's gratitude for the lesson learned. You don't need to wish harm or hold resentment. You simply release what cannot meet you in honesty. The beauty of peace is that it doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to prove that it's right. It simply is. And when you live in that space, your perception sharpens naturally. You start recognizing energy faster, understanding intentions sooner, and choosing calm without guilt. You no longer fight to convince anyone to stay. You stop trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. To live philosophically is to live lightly, to let go of what disturbs your soul, and hold close what nourishes it. You begin to understand that foolishness is not rare, it's just loudly present. Wisdom, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't seek attention, it just observes, and through that observation, it keeps you safe. When you carry wisdom like a lantern within you, you can walk through the darkest encounters without losing yourself. In the end, what matters is not how quickly you spot a foolish man, but how gently you return to yourself afterward. The journey is not about avoiding heartbreak forever, but about becoming strong enough to recover without hardening, to remain open without being naive, to remain kind without being blind, because true wisdom is not cold. It is warm and calm and deeply alive. It teaches you that your peace is not a privilege granted by others, but a home you build within yourself, one quiet choice at a time.